Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben. Today I'm going to be doing a deep dive into what I consider is one of the coolest variants of the Les Paul Standard to date, and that is the Les Paul Standard / Anaconda Burst. On my left is the Gibson, on my right is the Epiphone. Let's get into it. So the quick and dirty of this guitar is in 2017, Gibson asked Slash to be the first global brand ambassador and that he would help them develop select models for the custom shop, the Gibson USA line, and the Epiphone line. Now, I'm not sure how deep his involvement actually is, but I have seen that video circulating where he's happily signing his $8,000 Signature Series guitar. But anyway, along with this announcement, they decided they wanted to release a special edition of the Les Paul Standard. Later that year, the Gibson Custom Shop released 300 special Anaconda Burst models. There was 25 of them that were signed that had AA flamed maple tops. These retailed for about $7,500. There were 25 plain tops that were also signed. These retailed for about $6,500. And lastly, there are 250 plain top unsigned models, and these retailed for about $5,000. That same year, Epiphone also released 100 of these models that were signed by Slash, and those went for about $1,200. Later on in 2018, the Gibson USA shop released about 500 models. 450 of them were not signed, and those retailed for about $2,800. And 50 of them were signed, and that went for about $5,000. And then Epiphone followed suit by having a special release of 900 unsigned models, and that went for about $900. And what was unique about these 4 releases is that they each had Seymour Duncan APH-1 Alnico 2 Pro humbucking pickups. And these pickups were made to model the Seymour Duncan pickups that were in Slash's Les Paul, which ironically was not a Les Paul, it was a replica made by Chris Derrig. Now let's see what makes these things tick. Now the Gibson USA model at the time of release was $3,000. You can no longer buy this guitar brand new, but a comparable Slash guitar, which has pretty much identical specs, we'll say the Victoria model, is about $3,200. In complete disclosure, I got this one off the Gibson demo shop, so it was substantially less than that cost. Now the Epiphone model is about $800 and is still available today. So as usual, Gibson has their 4 times the price markup, which is pretty common amongst similar models. The most obvious thing you're going to notice about these guitars is the top, right? Now you can see that Gibson has a slightly darker top there as opposed to the Epiphone. It's actually more akin to the short-lived Ocean Bursts that they used to have back in 2017, which might have been influenced by this guitar or vice versa. One thing I also like is the flamed maple up there. You can really see this pattern in it, which you don't really get too much on the Epiphone model. And the Epiphone itself is more of a brighter green. You can see that. And then the top, even though it's supposed to be a flamed maple veneer, is actually pretty uneventful, I think. Additionally, it looks like the black edge is a little bit deeper on the Gibson than the Epiphone, if just a touch. But otherwise, these guitars are pretty much just Les Paul standards in every way and shape and form. So let's start with the case. The Gibson comes with a traditional faux leather brown case. Down at the bottom here, we see the usual Gibson logo. A nice plush red interior, and inside the pocket, we see the Gibson goodie bag. Inside the bag, the Gibson Certificate of Authenticity, and this might be just because it's from the demo shop. A polishing cloth, a Gibson strap, the Gibson Owner's Manual, the Gibson tool, a little baggie of Dunlop / Scully picks, a black truss rod cover, the strap side of the Schaller strap locks that are on the guitar, a pick guard in case you want to try your hand at putting 2 brand new screw holes in your guitar, and lastly, keys to the case. The Epiphone's case is a nice black faux leather hardshell case with a pretty cool Scully print right there on the headstock. Move down to the lower bout and we get to the usual Epiphone logo. Inside the case, a nice plush red interior, and inside the pocket, the Epiphone goodie bag. Open up that goodie bag and we see an ad for the Gibson app, the warranty card, a whole bunch of stickers, the Gibson strings toe tag, Epiphone strap locks, which I've never actually seen before, and keys to the case. Both of these guitars have a mahogany body and a flamed maple top. The difference is what we see on the Gibson is the actual maple cap there with the AAA figuring, Whereas on the Epiphone, we don't know what the visual quality of the maple is because it has a veneer top. And what veneer is basically they take a really nice piece of wood, say like this one here, and they'll slice it into 25, 50, 100 different paper-thin slices and essentially make a clone army of these Epiphone guitars. So there's probably a few, maybe quite a few guitars that have almost identical tops to this with just slight variations in the striations of the wood. Now another thing to point out is the backside finish of these guitars. So the Epiphone has more of a clearish cherry coat on it, which actually looks pretty nice, I think, to my eye. When I first got this Gibson, I actually took a quick cursory glance at the back, and I thought it was more of like a almost flat ebony. You can see there's not much there. However, if I were to put a flashlight to this, you can actually see it's a really, really, really dark finish, and you can actually make out the wood underneath it. So in a dark room, though, it just looks pretty much flat black. Also, what I found, which is pretty common for Epiphone versus Gibson comparisons, at least the ones I've done, is that the Gibson body is about an 1/8 of an inch longer in this dimension, as well as this dimension and this dimension. Also, the body's about a 1/16, maybe a little bit more of an inch thicker in this dimension. And I think you'll find that that really plays into some of the weight, which I'll talk about later. Now the necks of both these guitars are made of mahogany. The Gibson is described as having a vintage C-shape profile, whereas the Epiphone is described as having a custom slash profile. Now to my hands, the Gibson has maybe what's considered a more traditional C, as they say, and the Epiphone maybe feels like it's closer to a D shape, but it's, it's very close. Whatever it is, it's very close. Both these guitars also have 22 medium jumbo frets as well as Graphtec nuts. When it comes to the measurements for the Gibson, you're getting a 1.68 at the nut here, 0.89 inches at the first fret, and about 1 inch flat here at the 12th fret. When it comes to the Epiphone, you're getting a very, very slightly smaller nut at 1.67 inches, slightly smaller first fret at 0.86, and down here at the 12th, you're getting the same 1 inch thickness. So while they're not exact, they're actually pretty darn close. On the back side of the neck here, you can see that Gibson has the Scully logo there in sort of like a silver silkscreen, whereas the Epiphone has the same logo but in a goldish silkscreen. When it comes to the headstock profile, the Epiphone here has their usual 13-degree angle back, and the Gibson here on my left has their more steeper 17-degree angle back. And lastly, the headstocks. Gibson, of course, with their usual open book style, and Epiphone with their usual gliding dove, or whatever they're calling it today. I gotta be honest, moving these guitars back and forth is kind of a workout compared to some of my other reviews. Now moving on to the hardware of the Anaconda Burst Les Paul, on the Gibson, we've got our usual advanced plating stamped stop bar here, and our Gibson branded ABR1 bridge. Now on our Epiphone here, we've got our usual Epiphone branded Locktone stop bar, as well as our Epiphone branded Locktone Tune-o-matic bridge. Now if you don't know what the Locktone stuff is, I'll show you in this little clip here. Yeah, and that's basically it. It's got some clips in here that keep these pieces firmly attached to the posts in the body, as well as what Epiphone claims keeps them in firm contact for maximum performance and sustain, although I'm not so certain of that claim myself. Just for kicks, the bridge and the stop bar weigh about 93 grams on the Gibson, which is just a touch over 3 ounces, and on the Epiphone those same pieces weigh about 115 grams, which is just a touch over 4 ounces. Then moving on to the body, we get to the strap buttons. You can see that the Gibson here has your Schaller strap locks, which are pretty much a slash staple. If you want to know what I think about those, check out this video right here. And then on the Epiphone, you've got the traditional flower pot style, but these ones have been modified just a little bit from usual. You can see in the middle there that it's a little bit thinned out there, and I imagine that is because of the Epiphone strap locks, which I've never used before. Should we look into that? Let's look at it. So this is the Epiphone strap lock there. See, it says Epiphone. It looks like it's got a little E-clip built into it there. But in terms of how it actually works, it's not like a Schaller at all where it has like a button that you press. I think it's kind of like the lock tone stuff. It just snaps in and snaps out. Let's see. Yeah, snap in when you're done. When you're done, snap out. It's a little finicky. So yeah, it's a little bit like the lock tone stuff in that it snaps in and with a little tug it would snap back out. I honestly don't know if I would trust this either, because if it happened to rotate around backwards like so, and you say jumped up and down, it would potentially just snap back out and your guitar would be laying on the ground. Not a good thing, I imagine. But if you've used those, I'd be curious to know what you think of them as well, because this is the first time I've actually seen them. Now moving up the neck here, past the medium jumbo frets here, we get to the tuners. Both these guitars have Klein style tuners, each branded with their own brands, Gibson and Epiphone respectively. Using a little bit of low budget ingenuity, I can determine that the Gibson's tuners there are 14:1 gear ratio, whereas the Epiphone's tuners here are 18:1 tuning ratio, and they actually feel pretty good in my fingers. Now lastly, we move over here to the truss rods. Underneath these signature plates here, you've got your traditional Gibson truss rod, and underneath the Epiphones you actually get a dual action truss rod. Moving on to the electronics of these guitars, this is where they differ from the previous editions of the Slash Anaconda Burst. So for this model, Gibson did away with the Seymour Duncan APH pickups, and they developed what they call their custom Burstbucker Alnico 2 pickups, which I believe is a modified Burstbucker 1 in the neck and a Burstbucker 2 in the bridge here. And they call them the custom Burstbucker Alnico 2 pickups. For the readings on the Gibson, we get an 8.65 at the bridge, we get an 8.23 at the neck, and at the middle we get a 4.2. Now Epiphone has done a very similar thing with their pickups. They also did away with the Seymour Duncan pickups as well, and they developed what they are calling the custom ProBucker Alnico 2 pickups. Now in the bridge here we read an 8.49, in the neck we read an 8.03, and in the middle we get a 4.12. Now flipping the guitars over and pulling off the panel cavity covers, we've got a similar set of everything in here. They've both got, let's see, modern wiring. We've got orange drop capacitors on both. Gibson has their usual Gibson branded 500K pots, and Epiphone has CTS pots, also reading 500K. So let's talk about some of the other materials on these guitars as well. Moving at the top of the neck here, you can see both the logos printed as usual. The Gibson and the Epiphone both have Slash signed truss rod covers there. You can see that the Epiphone has their usual 3-screw truss rod cover, and the Gibson has their usual 2-screw truss rod cover there as well. Both guitars have the Graphtec nuts as mentioned earlier. The Klein style tuners are both this dirty yellow keystone color there. Both guitars have plastic inlays. When it comes to the binding on these guitars, they're both a cream binding, but the Epiphone went with the aged look there, as you can see, whereas the Gibson has more of a traditional cream binding color. So most of the other plastic on these guitars is black, and I'm talking about things like the switch tip covers there, the poker chips, the pickup rings, the bobbins, the black top hat knobs, the black jack plates, which are right, the black jack plates, and lastly on the back side we've got the cavity covers for both the switch and the pots are black. That's kind of a dumb thing to say. Now when it comes to the feel of these guitars, they're similar but they're not exact. For starters, you're definitely going to feel the weight difference. The Gibson weighs in at about 1.5 pounds heavier than the Epiphone, coming in at about 10.05 pounds, whereas the Epiphone here weighs in at about 8.59 pounds. In terms of the necks, I know it says they have slightly different profiles, but for me I didn't find it too jarring jumping from one guitar to the other. I'd say honestly the biggest thing was just carrying this 10-pound guitar and playing it over an extended period of time versus the Epiphone. But as we know, Slash seems to like his guitars very heavy, and thus this one is not weight relieved at all. I don't think the Epiphone's weight relieved Now when it comes to the scale of these guitars, I always get comments about this, but yes, the Gibson has a very slightly shorter scale than the Epiphone. It's nothing to be alarmed about. I don't think anybody's going to notice that. But in total, the Gibson is about 3/16 of an inch shorter scale than the Epiphone. Now I'm going to run through some jams with both of these guitars, and I will set each of them identical and play the same thing identical and switch between them, and you can use your ears to judge. I'll also do a neck dive test at the top of the segment, even though I don't expect anything out of the ordinary with these Les Pauls. Well, there you have it, everyone. I'm curious what you think about the sound differences between these. According to my ears, the middle position, I think the Gibson was a little bit clearer than what the Epiphone was giving me with the same tone settings. But as contrast to that, I think the Gibson was a little bit too dark in the neck position versus the Epiphone, at least for me. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you like this video, please consider subscribing as well as clicking the like button. That actually helps me make more content like this. Thank you guys for checking it out. Next time.